we are all assembled after assemblage. Welcome. My name is Hope Mohr. Thank you so much to Judy and the Film Festival for convening this really special event.
Can we get rid of that
Can you
light?
see anything?
Can we turn off the projector
That would be a
light?
good
It's
idea.
beaming in our eyes. If that's possible. Thank you. So I'd like to begin by introducing our illustrious panelists. To my left directly is Charlie Moulton. Guggenheim Award winner Charlie Moulton began his career dancing with the Merce Cunningham Dance Company from 1973 to 76. He has created works for the Joffrey Ballet, Baryshnikov's White Oak Project, and many other dance companies in the U.S. and abroad. He is the winner of a 1989 Dorothy Chandler Arts Achievement Award and has received support for his work from the NEA, NYSCA, the Jerome Foundation, and New Music USA, among others. He has directed theater and opera and has created works for film and TV, including choreography for 2,000 dancers in Matrix Reloaded. He is a founding co-director of PS 122 in New York and is widely regarded for his signature work, Ball Passing, in which large groups work together to solve a living puzzle. He will be an artist in residence at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital in 2020, and he will give a reading from his memoir, The Choreographer's Apology, about dancing with Cunningham and learning chess from John Cage on Sunday, October 20th at ODC. I also want to mention, is the footage of Westbeth in the lobby?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see him featured in the video footage of Westbeth in the lobby. To Charlie's left is Margaret Jenkins, a choreographer, teacher, and mentor to many artists, as well as a designer of unique community-based dance projects, most notably Chime, Choreographers in Mentorship Exchange. In the 60s, she moved to New York to study at Juilliard, continued her training at UCLA, and returned to New York to dance in the companies of Jack Mohr, Viola Farber, Judy Dunn, James Cunningham, Gus Solomons Jr., and Twyla Tharp. From 1964 to 1976, Margie was a member of the faculty of the Merce Cunningham Studio and restaged his works for companies in the US and in Europe, including for the Kolberg Ballet in Sweden, one of the first times Merce's work was performed by another company. In 1973, she formed the Margaret Jenkins Dance Company. She opened one of the West Coast's first studio performing spaces and school for the training of professional modern dancers, where Merce Cunningham was a frequent guest. In 2013, she celebrated the 40th anniversary of her company. She's created over 80 works. In 2008, she was one of 2 women commissioned to create a new work for the 75th anniversary of the San Francisco Ballet. Margaret Jenkins has received numerous awards, including a Guggenheim, an Irvine Fellowship, the San Francisco Arts Commission Award of Honor, 3 Izzies, including a Sustained Achievement Award, and the Bernard Osher Cultural Award. To Margie's left is Karen Attix. Karen Attix danced with Merce Cunningham Dance Company from 1974 to 1976. After relocating to her native Bay Area, she toured the U.S. as an affiliate artist and developed a solo repertory with commissioned choreography by Margaret Jenkins, Brenda Way, Henry Berg, and the late Larry Grenier. With Virginia Matthews, she founded Maddox Dance in 1980 and toured throughout California, New York, Oregon, Turkey, and Israel. A recipient of 2 NEA choreography fellowships, Attix taught Cunningham Technique extensively in Bay Area studios and colleges, including at Mills and UC Berkeley. Retiring from professional dance in 1986, she went into arts administration and became the manager of UCSF Arts and Performances, helping to establish the UCSF Orchestra, which is now the renowned Parnassus Symphony. She moved to Nevada City with her husband in 2005 to pursue their shared kinetic passion, downhill skiing. And she is featured in the video of Square Game in the lobby. And last but not least, to Karen's left is Bill Yahraus, one of the editors of Assemblage. One of the, or the only editor?
I don't know, Swami. What do you think?
We work together.
Okay. He was an editor of Assemblage, the film you have just seen. After graduating from the Annenberg School at the University of Pennsylvania, Bill began his filmmaking career in San Francisco as a member of the documentary unit at KQED. In Los Angeles, he formed Focal Point Films with Christine Burrell and David Davis. A career in feature film editing followed, with an extensive list of credits on such films as Pass the Ammo, Heartland, Country, The Long Walk Home, and Silent Tongue. Currently, he's producing documentaries in collaboration with his wife, Robin Rosenthal. Since 1999, he has taught film production at the University of Southern California. So thank you all so much for being here. I want to begin by simply asking each of you when and where you found Merce, or how he found you, and what were your first impressions of him and his work. Who would like to go first?
That's me.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go first. I found Merce because of Dick Mohr. Dick Mohr hired me to be one of the film unit's filmmakers. There weren't a lot of us. He had a real knack for picking people to work on projects, and he and Merce cooked up this idea of doing something in Ghirardelli Square. I had no background in dance, zero. I was fresh out of film school. I made a film. My project in film school was with Andy Warhol when he was making these pillows. Exactly. And so along came Merce with the company, and basically we were just thrown together. 4 filmmakers and the company, and of course Gordon and David Tudor, and they were recording, and they eventually came up with John's score. So I knew nothing about Merce, but then this became a large part of my life for a long time, making the film and then entering the dance world, where I can proudly say that I have danced in one of Margie's pieces. And I spent a long time living with Teresa Dickinson, who is here with us now.
My first exposure to Merce was 1965 at the University of Utah. I was a ballet major intent on being a ballerina, and I had one slight problem. I hated toe shoes. So I struggled with my bloody feet, and then the Cunningham Company came to Kingsbury Hall on the Salt Lake City campus. We all went to all the dance concerts, that's what you did. And they were doing Winter Branch. Remember that piece? And all the ballet majors left. I was left alone in the balcony, and that was it. I was transfixed, mesmerized. I couldn't look back. It was a conversion moment. I knew I wanted to take my ballet technique and expand it and get rid of those toe shoes. So it was Merce Cunningham.
I think I won. I had been at Juilliard for a year, and the short story was it wasn't a very good fit, and I transferred to UCLA. And my second year at UCLA, Merce Cunningham came for an 8-week residency with his company, and that company at the time included Robert Rauschenberg and John Cage and Jasper Johns and Steve Paxton and Carolyn Brown and Viola Farber and lots of other kind of crazy, wonderful people. And they were on campus for 8 weeks teaching classes and teaching composition and technique and premiering work at Royce Hall. And the kind of short version of that 8 weeks, and I had really only studied Merce in books in the way that you did as a young person if you were studying the history of dance, and I didn't really think there was much connection in some way between me and this person. I had been raised here in San Francisco on Limon and on Cunningham Technique, which felt like a good fit at the time. But at Juilliard, something wasn't quite fitting for me in terms of what I was studying compositionally. The people were extraordinary, but there wasn't something that kind of felt right. I wasn't sure what it was. And when I got to UCLA and Merce started to teach his composition classes and technique classes, it was just one of those kind of moments, albeit I was very young, where I kind of knew that my mind and my body and my heart had kind of found a place. And I promptly got on a Greyhound bus and followed him back to New York. And my parents were not terribly happy. Being that I called them when I was in New York and said that I was there and not going to finish school. And they said, well, give it one more year. And I went back and did give it one more year, and for a number of reasons didn't stay. Gus Solomons came the following year to teach a workshop and asked me to go to New York and to be his partner, and so I left and went back to New York. And that was the beginning of a long history with Merce, but that's how I first met him, was at UCLA.
One of the things that strikes me about everyone. Hello? Thank you. One of the things that strikes me about everybody who talks about Merce is how inspired they were by his work, but also what an inspiring person he was. So it always felt to me that there was this towering presence, but also this wonderful man. And ubiquitously with the dancers, there's always this feeling of his generosity. My own story was when I was 15 years old, I was very interested in choreography. I was making my own work and went backstage at a Cunningham performance and waited at his dressing room. And when he came out, said, can I ask you questions? He said, yes. And so I spoke to him for half an hour about my work. And then at the end of this, I said, well, what do you suggest that I should do? And he said, well, there's only one way to find out what to do, and that's to try something. You just have to try it and see if it works. And sort of that was the end of it. For me as a choreographer and as an artist, he had kind of given me a lesson to live by, which I still live by at this point.
Wonderful, thank you. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the film while it's fresh in our mind. A couple questions for Bill. You were intimately involved in both the shooting and the editing of the film. Can you talk a little bit about how the film is unique from the film perspective, and how you use chance, the signature Cunningham cage, one of the signature methods that they used compositionally, how you use chance to determine the duration and order of the images in the film?
Well, it's complicated because we, in terms of being unique, this was at a time in San Francisco when there was a lot of experimental filmmaking going on, a ton, and we were caught up in that. But we were sort of, as filmmakers, Swami, I, Phil Green, and Dick Mohr, thrown together with a dance company to decide how do we approach this, and up until then, everything I had seen that had to do with dance, because I had to look at some dance movies to see what's going on, and it was all sort of proscenium stuff. And so we started talking about, well, let's dance with the dancers, with the cameras. The cameras were a lot bigger then too, by the way, and it was dance with the dancers. So the three of us. Swami here and Phil and I danced with the dancers for something like 3 weeks, just sort of like going in amongst them, and then we started thinking about, well, not the whole dancer, how about just pieces of the dancers, right? And then so in that respect, we were being very experimental in the way we were filming. And then when we started, we filmed some stuff like the opening against a backdrop, and then we thought, what if we took these images and made them really high contrast and used something called a holdback mat and started projecting sky through the dancers and brick walls behind them. And then Swami had a light show that he did, and all those colors of go through the thing, through the dancers and behind the dancers, and it's just sort of, we just went crazy, okay? and we started thinking, oh, well, I had to deal with John Cage, and anybody who's dealt with him knows that this is a trip, right? And he and Merce were both into random, but he was really into random. And it was sort of, how do I deal with random? Because I'm editing this thing. So I thought, well, we're going to do split screens. So let's split screens. Let's try that. Let's change the architecture of the image, right? And so one of the things that I did was I took all the shots in the split screen that were going to be in the split screen. I threw them down the stairs. And I picked them up in the order and put them in the split screen in that order. And that was fun. And then we used random numbers to determine which shapes we would put them in and how long they would be. Swami is nodding here. This is true, right?
From the logarithm scale.
From the logarithm scale, right? It was very bizarre. And then there was the whole thing about putting images together. And when I look at this, we look at the film now, I remember that there's a structure to it that starts out to be, structured, even though it's non-structured. The split screen at the beginning and the three dancers at the beginning, and then as you get into the film, it becomes more and more random, because what we're doing is we're taking camera original and putting two pieces of film together in the printer at the same time.
We did
three. And they said, "Oh, they'll never get through there." But it was just like, okay, well, what would happen if we just take these three strips of film and put them in the printer? And that's what came out, And at a certain point, we started thinking when we were shooting, well, why don't we just take the printer stock and run it through the camera and see what happens? So all those images of the architecture where there are fences and the dancers are coming through the fences, and that's all done by that. I got into random, and then I got into trouble, because at a certain point they sent us the soundtrack, which was composed completely without the picture, right? And the picture was cut without the soundtrack. And at one point I said, well, gee, that train sound at the end, that would go much better in some other part of the film. So when I went to New York, John Cage almost killed me. I can still hear him screaming at me.
Bill, I'm going to bring the
You
others
can't move
into
it.
the
Yeah,
conversation.
there you go.
Thank
So
you.
go ahead.
So assemblage provides a window into Merce's unique approach to composition, and I want to ask Karen and Margie and Charlie what, in your mind, is so singular about his work. You want to speak a little bit to Merce as a dance maker, and maybe what you learned by watching him make dances?
That's a very tough question. I think the randomness, yes, he evokes the beauty of nature, and probably which prompted me to actually pursue that as my aesthetic medium, is to be in the mountains, surrounded by nature. And I remember going to the premiere of Ocean with June. We were standing together at the Harmon Gym in Berkeley, and the person behind us had never seen a Cunningham work. How should I view it? And I said, well, have you been to the Monterey Bay Aquarium? And I said, approach it with that lens. You're going to be able to watch time and space evolve at a very natural, pleasant, but engaging and challenging pace. So I always bring that remembrance when I think of Cunningham work.
No, you should.
Oh.
You were in it.
In my opinion, what distinguishes Cunningham's work is that it's very, very good. And anyone here who's been a choreographer knows it's just an impossible thing to do. It's impossible to be an excellent dancer. It's impossible to be an excellent choreographer. Merce Cunningham was both. I also feel that his work was very informed by his virtuosity as a dancer. He was an extraordinary dancer, an extraordinary mover, and my personal belief is that whatever aesthetic he decided to make work in, he would have made just terrific work. He was just a really, really good artist.
Margie?
Well, I was never in the company, so I didn't have the, experience of being inside watching him make work. But I think that You're not hearing.
Here. Closer, closer.
Closer.
There you go. Now you're there.
No, I'm there. I was just saying that I was not in the work, but I think, watching it and watching him teach his work in some instances, I was fascinated in watching the film. Sorry, I have to put this down. You can hear me, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in watching the film and watching this gesture,
All the time.
and seeing this particular gesture, and then thinking about Merce talking, about gestures in his work, and then talking about movement and its relationship to meaning, or that things don't have meaning, and then feeling so much meaning in watching his work all the time. And my first exposure to Merce's work was a work called Place, that ends with Merce in a paper bag at the end, or a big plastic bag, trying desperately to get out of that bag, and then feeling as if so much, and there's so much power and depth in the choices that Merce made, and my feeling that even though he might have thrown many times or did not, who knows, the I Ching to make decisions about what came after what, and his belief, which I think he really did feel, that anything can follow anything, that the power of that mind and that imagination, and his belief in the power of gesture and the power of movement in having meaning, and that the spectator brings meaning to the movement, was his great gift, and his real belief that an audience has that power to bring meaning to what is done, and his trust in his own power of bringing meaning to the movement was, I think, one of the things that I found so powerful. And I never found him as a performer anything less than absolutely and almost overwhelming as a powerful mover. And I think that when his dancers knew that, or paid attention to that, or intuited that, that's what he brought out of them, and anybody that really surrounded him. That's what, if they were paying attention, either, again, intuitively or just physically, they got that light from him. And for me, I don't mean spiritual light, but they got that sense of letting something in that you couldn't get, really, and I don't think I've ever gotten from anybody else.
Wonderful, thank you. Of course, part of Merce's legacy is not only his body of choreography, but also his technique and the training that he developed to support the work. So I wanted to ask, again, the three of you as dancers, what was it like for you to train physically in the Cunningham Technique? Any challenges or transformations you can share about that journey, or maybe what's unique about the technique?
Well, I think it's impossible, I think, is the short answer, and marvelous and beautiful and extraordinary. It's all the hard parts of ballet, all the hard parts of modern dance. I think there was a bar that Merce always set for all of the dancers that was very, very, very high. That was a bar that he set for himself. And I think being around Merce Cunningham, everybody became a better dancer, and I think this speaks to Margie's point to some degree. I did not, for myself, I was not a natural Cunningham dancer. It didn't feel like it was the right fit for me. And yet, I think there's such a beauty that he inspired in us to go beyond our limitations and to become something other than we could imagine. That really was a great gift. Just to be around him, you felt like a really good dancer, and that you could really do this stuff, as difficult as it was.
Fascinating question. It's daily. And that I got from my ballet technique. It is daily, but maybe one AGMA day off, which is your union. And you bring that, it's that practice, and that becomes a meditation, which on some level I still do. Right now I'm in a gyrotonic trainer, and watching this film, starting with the spine, And the spinal motions, he had such an anatomical grasp of this major portion of the human body, and the exercises he developed to really work your spine in such an articulate manner, the same way the ballet technique would develop your feet and your legs. As a young dancer, I never took that in, but watching the film was that's a healthy spine. That'll really carry you into your 90s if you do that daily practice. So definitely, that was so inspiring to see that in the film about the technique. As Charlie said, it's very, very hard, very impossible, but I realized the centering it took to be able to move in any direction, with any rhythm, with any line, ballet line, or however you want to describe it. That center is something that is almost identical to what I do now, which is downhill skiing. You have no idea what's underneath your skis. You dance with the mountain, and the mountain always leads, as they say. So I can credit having that Cunningham background with just being able to handle what's underneath my feet, no matter where I am. So it's quite a legacy.
It's fascinating. You know, it's interesting when I was thinking about the question, Hope, because she was kind enough to share the questions with us before we got here, having danced since I was a young person, and having didn't study ballet ever, was not part of my training. And I studied Graham and Lamone here in San Francisco with various teachers. That was my background. And when I then came to the Cunningham Technique, those were the techniques I was used to relying on. And in those techniques, imagery is a very important part of what kind of supports your training. And both of those techniques are wonderful and give you a tremendous amount. And I'm very grateful for them and having had them as a young person. But what was very striking in the shift, so to speak, to training in the Cunningham Technique was being stripped in a way of metaphor in the class, and not having that as something that carried you through from exercise to exercise, that you just did what was given to you, and you were not given the aid of reach like A or do something that feels like A. You just were given the movement itself to do. And there's something very frightening about that if what you've done for the 18 years prior is to move in relationship to a metaphor. And I remember the first time that Merce said, not to me specifically, but to a class that I was in, about working on being where you were at the time that you were there, and not thinking about where you were going to be going, to be present at that moment. And talking at that time in class about so many of the dancers in the room looking like they were thinking about where they were going to have to go next, and not being completely present in that moment. And I think it was one of the great beauties about how he danced, was being so fully there. And I think there was also another great gift in watching him. And I also remember hearing him say once to a class that I was in, that there's a difference between showing and showing off. And I thought that was a great lesson that's kind of stayed with me, that I've also thought about when I've taught.
Thank you. Of course, why we're here today is to honor Merce's legacy. So I wanted to ask all of you what working with Merce, how that has influenced you as an artist and a person, and any thoughts on Cunningham's legacy moving forward. And maybe we can start with Bill, just to bring you back in. You want to pass the mic down there?
Sure.
Thanks. So again, just reflections on Merce's legacy, either on you personally, his influence on you and your work, or larger, in the larger culture.
Well, that's kind of tough, because I didn't spend a lot of time with Merce. I spent the better part of 3 weeks, and then back and forth. And then I did spend a number of years with San Francisco dancers, working with them. As a filmmaker, I'm primarily a filmmaker. But what I would say, actually, I'm going to say this to Dick's daughter. Your father was the greatest, a huge influence on me. He taught me that, this may be true of Merce or not, but he taught me that it is always our film. It's not my film. It's not Swami's film. It's not Dick's film. It's not Phil's film. It's our film. And as filmmakers working together, we bring the best that we all can bring to the making of the film. Now, I think that that's been with me for my entire life. I work in collectives for the most part. Now I work with my wife, and obviously it's our film. And but I would say that working with Merce and watching that company work was inspiring in the same way, because anybody could have an idea, and everybody did have an idea. They really came with very little of that work choreographed. I know that the entrance and the exit were choreographed, but it would be like tables. What can we do with these tables? You know, or what can we do with this space that's down here as opposed to this space that's up here? How could we do this? And I know that Merce was a brilliant choreographer, but I know that he could not have done this all by himself. And the dancers brought a lot to that. So that's what I would say, you know. That's been with me my whole life. This is only the second film I ever worked on professionally.
Okay, great. Karen? Thank you.
The legacy, I mean, personally, I basically have to just look at my garden. And, you know, you look at it from up above, the way the film is, and I choreograph, and it's a 10-year work in progress, and it changes according to the wind, the soil, the sun, the snow. And I can bring that to this organic field that I have in front of me. And I'm occasionally asked to choreograph the local high school. I always bring in my Cunningham background. They're very appreciative of it. On a bigger scale, though, Merce, along with Stravinsky, Picasso, Balanchine, a real genius of the 20th century, and to free dance to this new way of looking at space and time and all the collaborators, and to treat the human body with such a sense of unpredictability. Just watching in the film Merce running around Ghirardelli Square. That's what my grandkids are doing. You give them space and they explore. And they're intense and focused. And he has that childlike sense of creativity that is so hopeful for our species, that we can still be curious. And that, to me, is his legacy, is that curiosity.
Margie?
It's complicated, you know, because I think there were a lot of things that Merce was not. And I think that, you know, he made a lot of things possible. But I think there are a lot of things that Merce was not that I would say that he also gave me by not being those things. And I think that when you have a dance company and you spend, as I have, 45 years years, having a lot of people in the studio who spend their lives giving you the best years of their lives to make work and be in a collaborative relationship with you. You think very hard about what is your relationship to them and what's your responsibility to them. And I would think a lot and often about what Merce's personal relationship was with people in his company. And I think what Merce did brilliantly was to make work. And what Merce didn't do very brilliantly was to develop intimate relationships and ongoing relationships with the dancers in his company. That was not what he did well. He made dances beautifully, and he danced beautifully. And so I learned from him about things that I wanted to learn to do better myself. And I love him for being so generous with what he did, and I love him for teaching me what I needed to learn to do better myself. And I also feel great gratitude that this man came up to this young 22-year-old in a corner one day and asked me what I was doing, and I said I was trying to figure out a way to notate his work. And a year later called me in Paris and asked me if I wanted to try out his notation on a company in Sweden. And I said, sure. And from that moment on, my career teaching his work around the world became something extraordinary for me and launched a whole other discovery for me about myself, about Merce, and about being in the world. And so I think he taught me about how to expand myself as a person by what he was and by the things that he wasn't. And I would hope that all of us as artists teach those that we're in a daily, ongoing relationship with about what we are and what we're not.
Well, I think, you know, on a larger level in terms of his legacy, I think we're, conservatively looking at, 25 masterpieces, possibly 35. I mean, the works of art that he created are extraordinary. They stand entirely on their own. They're resonant. They will continue to be resonant. They're acts of great beauty, pinnacle of modernity. And so there's a kind of timeless quality to this work, which goes far beyond, this sort of late 20th century aesthetic of rolling dice, and they're just incredibly beautiful, in a certain way. And there's a real simplicity to them in that. On a personal level, the first, when I was in the Cunningham Company, Merce, many of the dancers that worked with Merce were making their own work during unemployment periods, and I made a long minimal tap solo. My father had been in vaudeville, and I grew up as a kid tap dancer. And this tap solo was just, horrific, relentless tap dancing, called 300, 300, 300, 1400. And there were only 4 steps in the whole thing. And Merce came to the performance. It was at the Paula Cooper Gallery the day after. He pulled me aside in class. He had loved it, and he knew everything about tap dancing. He knew all about Astaire, Rogers, the Nicholas Brothers, Bojangles, Sandman Sims, Honey Coles. I mean, he really knew about this stuff. And here's this person making this very sort of, the highest aesthetic avant-garde work, and he's trading tap steps with me. And so, on a personal level, that what I took from that and from him was this kind of universal love that he had of dance. Despite whatever the style is of the dance, he was able to recognize, here's a beautiful dance, here's a beautiful dancer, that's exciting to me. So it never had that, his work never had that quality of, like, let's pull up the ladder and leave all the little people, to kind of do their own thing. He always just loved dance. He was a dancer, and he loved it, and he made great dances.
Thank you so much. We have time for a few questions from the audience. We want to open it up if you have questions. I know many of you out there have personal connections to the work, so please feel free to add your voices to the conversation. Yes, go ahead. If you can speak up, please.
Sorry?
Speak up so everyone can hear you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I actually do have a personal connection because I also was hanging around KQED in the 1960s. I don't know if you remember me, Bill, but my name is Jim Scalem, and I produced a lot of shows, and Dick Mohr was a mentor to me also. And what he said about expressing the word hour was really true of the whole station. And she's too modest to say it, but Judy Flannery over here produced a lot of fantastic performance programs with the San Francisco Opera, Ballet, and Symphony in the 1980s. But Bill, I remember I used to use this to raise money on Channel 9. Bill, this was an assemblage of video and audio. You touched on that briefly, and I wonder if you could comment on the audio, perhaps even a little bit more than the John Cage music. And I wonder if I saw Bernie Stauffer's name in the credits, a wonderful guy, one of the first people I ever met at KQED. And did he work with you on the sound?
Well, Bernie was our film unit. He was our film unit sound person, along with Stan. Remember Stan Cronquist, right?
Cronquist.
Yeah. So Stan, but Bernie was sort of our liaison, and he basically what he did for the film was that he helped Gordon and David get their stuff, get the equipment that they needed, and I think he did a bunch of touring around because I don't think they were that familiar with San Francisco. And there's also stuff, the groaning of this. Remember Zego, remember Bob, and the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, the groaning of the Golden Gate Bridge, I know that you can credit Bernie Stauffer for that being in the soundtrack.
Any other questions or comments from the audience?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Hi. You were asking about the legacy, and to me the legacy was in the whole environment. We had a storefront in Ghirardelli Square for like 5 weeks, and we were all there. The dancers, the filmmakers, and the sound-making crew, Gordon Muma and David Tudor. And they were going around taping everything all over town. And then John Cage came, and I'm like, 21 years old. It's the first time I'm, and I'm in the room with these guys, and what they taught me was have fun. Just have a ball. Do whatever you want to do. Make the craziest sound. They were in there trying to distort the sound rather than make it high fidelity. And it was just have a gas, have a ball, have fun. And everyone else then has fun doing it. And to me, it was like there is this dance community, and it still continues. And there's something about being just even on the periphery of that was just a thrill to see that whole thing. But the key thing for me was like, do your thing, be art, and have fun.
Well, on that note, I think we are out of time for questions, but we do have a reception outside, so this conversation can continue. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists.